Welcome to our fourth session. This is session 4, video 1. We're going to move on now and cover chapter 5 in our textbook. Chapter 5 is all about understanding the importance of gathering really good, current, and relevant information to help marketers make good, informed, evidence-based decisions. You're going to hear that word or that phrase a lot in the UPEI business program, evidence-based. It's because we're trying to encourage our students to recognize that no one, regardless of who you are in the business world, has the answers to all the questions, and that good leaders, good managers, go out and actively look for the best possible information to help them make the best possible decisions for their organization. So it's really about helping managers reduce risk by making sure that they have access to the best possible information so that the decisions that they make for their organization are based on sound information. So there we go. So marketing information and customer insights. Customer insights are all about understanding the customer and the marketplace in which you and the customer interact. It's the basis for creating all customer value and relationships. You need to know as much as you possibly can as an organization about your customer so that you can ensure that you're able to satisfy their needs and really cultivate that ever so important customer relationship. The better information you have, the better decisions you're going to be able to make, and that creates a really strong and desirable competitive advantage. The more information you know about your customers, the more likely it is that you're going to be able to satisfy their needs, and so that represents a really, really positive advantage to your organization. But where you get that information and how you gather that information actually is something that's really important, and you really need to think about. If you decide that this is something that's of interest to you, there is a whole course later on in the business program all about market research. And actually, if you took a look at sort of the job opportunities out there, one of the most coveted areas of market research or jobs in marketing is actually in the area of market research. The reason why information and market research is now so much more desirable than it was, say, a couple of decades ago is because there's actually way more information out there. Because we do so much of our interaction using technology, and every time we do that, information is collected about us, there's more information circulating out there, and so marketers are trying to figure out ways to access that information and then use that information about us to make better decisions. So marketing information systems are the individuals, the people, and the various processes and procedures that you engage in order to figure out what information you need and develop that needed information, so collect it, and then ultimately to analyze it and use it to help you make decisions. So this entire system of understanding what information you need, developing the means to collect that information, and then analyzing it and using it to make decisions is called the MIS, or the Marketing Information System. And this is sort of a diagram that illustrates the marketing information system. There's a couple of things that I want to point out. It's not just marketing managers that need access to good information. Certainly there are other leaders in an organization that might need access to good information as well. But in this context, given it's the marketing class, we're going to focus on the needs of the marketing managers. So one of the things that they have to do is figure out, again, what kind of information do they need and do they want to collect about their various customers. So that's important. Then they have to figure out how they're going to get that information, and that's really the bulk of what we're going to talk about today, is how to get that information. And then at the back end, this yellow square on the right hand side of your screen is all about analyzing and, most importantly, using information. Too often in organizations, when they invest in collecting good consumer information, that information doesn't necessarily get into the hands of the decision makers, and so the information is not then fully utilized to help make decisions. If you don't use information to make good decisions, then why are you gathering the information in the first place? So some of the various groups that you may want to collect information about include your target markets, your customers, either your existing customers or your potential customers, the marketing channels that you are using. So that could be your downstream channels like your wholesalers and retailers, or your upstream channels including your suppliers and other front-end partners. You could gather information about your competitors. You could gather information about other publics that have a vested interest in your organization or that you have a vested interest in. And you can also gather information about the macro environmental forces, which we talked about in the last video sessions. So when it comes down to developing marketing information, this is really what we're going to spend the bulk of our time talking about in this session. There are really three broad things that you want, or places you want to look when you're gathering information. The first place you want to look is actually at any internal databases that your company might have. Your company may already be collecting really good and valuable information about customers. And so if they do, that's a great place to start. So understanding what information sources are available in your organization. So for example, does your cash register system gather information about customer purchases, the size of how much money people are spending per visit, what kinds of combinations of things are people buying. So are you gathering that? How are they paying? Are they paying cash, debit, or Visa? What kind of information is already being collected in your organization? How can you access that information? Is there a way for market researchers to easily access that information in a really efficient and a timely manner? And then you want to also think about, are there any gaps in the knowledge? So your organization may actually be collecting good information about your customers, but maybe there's some pieces of information that they aren't collecting, but that would be very useful to you. So you may want to think about that as well when you're looking at your internal databases. The next place you can look for information is, it's called marketing intelligence, and it's publicly available information. It could be from industry associations or think tanks or government sources or consultants that make their information available. It's about going online to the library databases and seeing what you can find. It's about talking to industry groups. Sometimes there's really good information that's actually already out there. You just need to dig around a little bit and try to find it. So this takes a little bit of work, and it also takes a little bit of skill and knowledge to know exactly where to look for this type of information, and then what to do with it once you find it. Not all information that's available out there on the internet or through various sources is equally of good quality. And so part of your job, if you're going out there looking for existing sources of information, is then to do a critical evaluation to say, okay, is this good information? Can I trust the information that's in here? Are there any inherent biases in here that I should be aware of? So you want to think about those kinds of things as well. This is typically called secondary information or secondary research, where you're basically borrowing the work of other people who have done research, and you're using that information for your own purposes. There's nothing wrong with that, but keep in mind that if you're publishing anything from this, you do need to cite your sources appropriately. So this is a great place to look for information, but sometimes, no matter how hard you look, you're just not going to find exactly what you're looking for. And if that's the case, you may need to conduct your own research. And this is the last box on the right-hand side of your screen. You, as an organization, may actually need to conduct your own market research. When your problem or the kind of information that you're collecting is so unique and so specific that it's not already collected by internal databases, or it's not available through secondary sources out in the marketplace, you may actually need to develop a process by which you systematically collect, analyze, and report on your own research findings to help your organization answer those all-important questions that they need to have answered. So this is the marketing research process. We're going to go through each of the steps of the process individually. The first step is defining the problem and the research objectives, so figuring out exactly what it is you're trying to learn What kind of information are you looking for? What is the ultimate goal of the research that you're trying to conduct? And we're going to, again, go over these in more detail in a moment. The second stage is developing the research plan and starting to collect the information. We'll talk about that more in a few moments as well. Then you're going to implement the research plan by collecting the data and analyzing it. We're not actually going to spend a whole lot of time talking about that part. We'll talk a little bit about making some key decisions regarding implementing the collection and analyzing of the data, but we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. And then the last step in the research process is interpreting and reporting the findings. Well, now that you have all this information, what does it actually tell us about our customers and what can we learn from it sort of in a holistic and meaningful manner? So the first stage, again, is defining the problem and the research objectives, and this actually is the most difficult and most important step in the market research process. The reality is, if you don't figure out exactly what it is you're trying to do, what questions you're trying to answer, and what you're trying to achieve, everything else you do afterwards becomes less useful. So it's really important to make sure you have a very, very clear understanding of what the problem is that you're trying to solve, what questions are you trying to answer, and what is the overall objective of your research. There are various objectives of research. You can look to explore a situation. Exploratory research is all about gathering information to help you figure out what the problem is. So when you're exploring a phenomenon, you're exploring a certain situation because you want to learn more about it. You don't know a whole lot, and so that's what exploratory research is all about. The next type of research is called descriptive research, and basically descriptive research is all about describing the current situation as it is, describing who your current customers are, what are their buying patterns, where do they live, how much money do they make, those sorts of things. Descriptive research is all about describing the current situation. And then the last type of objective for research is called causal research. And causal research is all about testing the cause and effect relationships between various variables in your business transactions. So for example, if I raise the price of my product by $5, what happens to the volume of product that I sell? The cause, the raising of the price, what is the effect of that? How much volume of product do I sell? So causal relationships are really important to understand. The challenge is that to really understand causal relationships, it's a much more intricate and challenging type of research to undertake. So you have to think about that carefully. So understanding, are you trying to understand the problem? Are you trying to describe what's currently going on? Or are you trying to assess cause and effect relationships? The second step of the research process is developing a research plan. How are you actually going to go about answering these really important questions that you just developed in the first step? And the process of developing a research plan, first of all, includes identifying all sources of existing data. There's no point in going out and gathering all kinds of new information if information that would help you answer your questions already exists. So the first thing you should do anytime you're embarking on a research plan is see if somebody's already done the work for you. Then you want to figure out what research approaches you're going to take, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. So how are you actually, if the information isn't already out there, how are you going to go about finding it and collecting it for yourself? How are you going to contact people, and how are you going to sample or decide who it is you're going to gather information from? And then what kinds of instruments, like surveys or questionnaires, are you going to use to collect that data? So these are some of the important things you want to think about at this stage of the research plan. Again, there's two primary types of data. There's primary data, which is data that you collect for your organization to help solve or resolve or answer very specific questions that you have asked and want to have answered. Primary data, the importance of primary data is that it must be relevant, it must help you answer your questions, it must be accurate, and so you have to very, very carefully gather the information. It must be current, meaning things change over time, so you want to make sure you have the most current information available, and it has to be unbiased. The information can't be tainted as a result of uh, shoddy research processes. The other kind of data is secondary data. We talked about that briefly already. Secondary data is data that already exists out in the marketplace or even in your own organization. And the advantage to secondary data is that it's way quicker and way cheaper than if you have to go out and collect your own data through primary data collection. So it is cheaper, it's much, much quicker. But the problem is that sometimes, although there may be some information out there, that information may not be exactly relevant to the question that you're trying to answer. It may not be current enough to give you a picture of what's going on today. It may be old or outdated information, and it may not be accurate because you don't necessarily always know how the information was collected, so you don't necessarily have the same ability to trust the accuracy of that information as in comparison to when you would gather the information yourself. And also, secondary data rarely will provide all of the information or answer all of the questions that you might have. It may answer enough of them that you're satisfied that, you know what, it's not worth the money and effort to collect our own information. There's enough here that we can use it, but the reality is you're probably never going to find secondary or existing data that answers all of the questions that you're asking for your organization. Primary data collection is again collecting information for your own purposes to answer your specific questions. And there's three different research approaches that you can take when you're collecting primary data. And the first is through observation. And there's really two main ways to conduct observational research. One is by actually watching what people do and recording what they do, or you can actually observe people as well digitally through their digital transactions and activities, so you can track people that way. You can conduct a survey using questionnaires. It is by far the most common form of data collection. Some of the challenges, though, around surveys, use of surveys, is that people are what's called survey fatigued, meaning we get surveyed so often that people are very often disinterested or not inclined to participate in surveys because they just don't want to, and it's time consuming and they just don't feel like doing it. And the last kind of research approach is experimental. You can actually conduct an experiment in a controlled environment where you test various things, usually for cause and effect relationships. You can play around with the various variables and see how people behave or respond. There's various contact methods. You can contact people via mail, telephone, or online. There's also other examples of contact methods. We're going to talk a little bit about sampling in a minute, and we'll talk a little bit more about research instruments. All of it in the next video.